The first thing I noticed was the strip of blue tape stuck to the concrete floor. It was 6 inches long, torn at one end, with "Return" written across it in black marker. The storage unit behind it was empty enough that my footsteps came back from the metal walls. My drafting table had been against the left side. 12 plastic bins had been stacked beside it. My father's chair, the one with the uneven back rail, had sat beneath a canvas cloth in the corner. Tools, winter clothes, old photographs, 2 lamps, a cabinet I built in trade school. 6 boxes I had not opened since my mother died. All gone. Only dust marks remained, and that strip of tape I could not peel from the floor. "You said Unit B14? The woman behind me already knew the answer. She wore a navy polo with the storage company logo and held a tablet against her chest. "Yes, Mateo Ruiz. I'm here to fix the autopay issue." My voice sounded reasonable, which surprised me. Her eyes moved from me to the empty room. "Mr. Ruiz, the unit was sold 3 days ago." I laughed once, not because anything was funny, but because the sentence could not possibly belong to my life. She introduced herself as Lena Park and asked me to come into the office. I told her I could hear her perfectly well where we were. I did not want fluorescent lights, a cup of water, or a closed door that would make the conversation official. She explained it anyway. The card attached to my account had been canceled after someone tried to use it in Nevada. I had replaced the card, but never updated the storage payment. The first notices went to my old apartment. Later emails landed in a spam folder I had stopped checking while installing an exhibit in St. Louis. A certified letter came back unopened. The facility followed its procedures. The lock was cut. The contents were photographed, listed, and sold. Every sentence had paperwork behind it. Dates, signatures, policies. Nothing I could argue with without sounding like a man trying to fight gravity. "How much?" I asked. Lena hesitated. "The balance?" "The auction." She checked the tablet. $860. That was the price of my life, apparently. Less than the invoice for the fake limestone arch I had finished the week before. I crouched near the marks where my drafting table had been and pressed my thumb against the blue tape. I had spent most of my childhood packing. Apartment in Dundalk, row house near Patterson Park, 2 rooms above a laundromat where the dryer vents warmed the walls in winter. My mother used to line up cardboard boxes and tell my sister and me to choose what mattered, not what we liked, what mattered. By 12, I could wrap glasses in t-shirts and pack a kitchen in 20 minutes. By 33, I built museum rooms designed to be dismantled. I had told myself temporary suited me. Standing inside B14, I understood that I had never stopped expecting someone to say the truck was leaving. Who bought it? Lena said they normally did not release buyer information, then showed me a yellow note attached to my account. The buyer had left his number after finding personal documents. A name and a Baltimore phone number had been written in square, heavy handwriting. Graham Rourke. I called before I could decide what dignity was supposed to sound like. A machine whined on the other end, then stopped. A man answered cautiously. "My name is Mateo Ruiz." There was a short silence. "I was wondering when you'd realize your life was in my workshop." The words hit hard enough that I stepped back. "You think that's funny?" "No." His voice was low and roughened by dust or disuse. He sounded tired, not amused, which somehow made me angrier. "You bought my belongings for $860. I bought the contents of an abandoned unit. It wasn't abandoned. I know that now." I asked for his address. He gave it without argument and said he would be there until 6. His workshop occupied the ground floor of an old brick machine building south of the harbor, where loading docks faced a cracked lot full of weeds. The faded sign beside the metal door read, "Rourke Restoration." Underneath, smaller letters promised furniture, fixtures, and salvage. I expected a resale warehouse. Instead, I found my life arranged in rows. My bins stood along one wall. My tools covered a steel table, each one visible. Photographs, tax papers, letters, and notebooks rested in shallow trays. Blue painter's tape marked everything. Return, sell, repair, unknown. A box of chipped kitchenware had been labeled return. My father's chair stood near a workbench, with its loose joint clamped carefully into place. Return hung from the seat. For several seconds, I forgot the speech I had prepared during the drive. The man at the bench set down a sanding block and removed his respirator. Graham Rourke was tall, broad through the shoulders, and covered in fine wood dust. A pale line crossed one knuckle. A fresh scrape marked his wrist. He did not smile. "You got here fast. You said you had my life." I said it was here. That distinction probably matters when you're the one who bought it. His jaw shifted. Probably. I hated the answer, because it gave me nothing to strike. I opened the nearest bin. Winter coats, boots, a purple blanket my mother had crocheted during the year she decided purple went with everything. None of it had been disturbed beyond what was needed to identify it. "You went through all of this." I sorted it. "You make money doing this?" "I restore furniture. Auctions are one way I find pieces. By buying things from people who miss payments. Sometimes." His honesty felt more insulting than a defense would have. "Which part did you plan to sell first?" Graham pointed toward a cleared space near the rolling door. "A metal shelving unit and a commercial lamp. They're gone. Everything with personal information or no reasonable resale value is yours." No reasonable resale value. I didn't say no value. He nodded toward the rows. Family photos, documents, clothes, handmade objects, personal tools. "Take them. I don't want payment." I stared at him. "Why?" "Because I bought salvage, not a stranger's childhood." The anger did not disappear. It simply lost its balance. I checked the tables again. My notebooks were there. My mother's blanket. My drafting tools. A tin of foreign coins my father used to bring home from the port. The farther I looked, the clearer one absence became. There was another box. Graham did not ask which one. A stillness entered his face. "Small archival carton," I said. "Gray. Water stain on the bottom. My father's name on the lid. I have it." "Where?" His gaze moved toward a closed office at the back. I stepped around the table. "You said everything personal was here." "It is here." "Then bring it out." Graham stayed where he was. "The box is yours. I'm not disputing that." That sentence usually comes before someone explains why he's keeping something that isn't his. "I'm not keeping it. It isn't on the table." "No." I was close enough to see a muscle move beside his mouth. He looked less like a reseller protecting inventory than a man guarding a door he feared opening. "What's inside?" "Cassette tapes, photographs, interview notes. The tapes are damp, and some cases are warped." "You listened to them?" "No." "Then why is that box different?" He held my gaze, then walked into the back office. When he returned, he was not carrying the box. He carried one photograph inside a clear protective sleeve and placed it on the steel table between us. My father stood in the picture at about 40, younger than I was used to remembering him. He wore a denim shirt with the sleeves rolled up and held a portable cassette recorder against his hip. Beside him stood a dark-haired woman, laughing at someone outside the frame. On the back, in my father's handwriting, were two names. Daniel Ruiz, Marianne Rourke. I read them twice. My father had been dead for 9 years. Graham had not said a single thing about his own family since I arrived, but the room changed around him when he looked at that woman. His shoulders remained square, his face stayed controlled, only his hands gave him away. He pressed both palms against the edge of the table, as though the steel were the only steady thing in the workshop. I looked from the photograph to him. "Who is she?" Graham's eyes stayed on the image. "The man is your father," he said. "The woman is my mother." For a few seconds, neither of us spoke. The workshop kept making small noises around us, the tick of cooling metal, the hum of an old refrigerator, traffic beyond the loading dock. I looked again at the photograph. My father's hair was thicker than I remembered, his smile easier. Graham's mother had one hand lifted as if she had just said something funny. "How do you know?" Graham turned the picture over and touched her name. "Because she signed everything with the same sharp R, and because I have a photograph of her wearing that coat." I wanted to ask where she was now. Instead, I asked, "Where's the box?" He led me into the back office, a narrow room with a desk, a metal cabinet, and shelves crowded with old radios and cassette decks. The gray archival box sat on a rubber mat beneath a small fan. A dark water stain had spread up one corner. My father's handwriting crossed the lid in faded marker. Oral history. Do not separate. Beneath it, in blue tape, Graham had written hold. Ask first. You added that? Yes. Why not return? Because I found my mother's name before I found your number. He stepped away from the shelf. The box is legally yours. You can take it right now. I won't stop you. Then why call it a hold? Graham removed a cracked cassette case from the cabinet and held it by the edges. These were stored against something damp. The tape inside may be stuck to itself. If you play it on a normal machine, it could stretch or tear. He pointed to a work table where an old deck was connected to a laptop and several tools. I restore audio equipment for a collector. I know enough to stabilize this, but not enough to promise every recording can be saved. And you want to listen because your mother might be on them. I want to know why her name is in your father's box. His eyes met mine. But I won't listen without your permission. The distinction mattered. I did not want it to, but it did. All morning, people had explained what they were allowed to do with my things. Lena had rules. The company had procedures. The auction had made strangers' rights more real than my intentions. Graham was the first person who had looked at something he legally possessed and asked whether he should touch it. I set both hands on the box. The cardboard was cool and slightly soft. One tape, I said. We try one. If it looks bad, we stop. Graham nodded once and cleared the work table, as if my answer deserved the same care as the tapes. We chose a cassette with my father's handwriting on the label. D. Ruiz, Intro/East Harbor Project. Graham put on thin gloves and showed me the warped edge of the shell. He replaced it with a clean casing, turning each screw slowly. I watched his hands, because it was easier than looking at the tape. You do this often? Not with recordings. I mean taking things apart that belong to strangers. Furniture doesn't usually object. People do. You've made that clear. The corner of his mouth moved, almost a smile. I should have been offended. Instead, I noticed how careful he was, not to brush my arm when he reached past me. Before he pressed play, Graham tore off a strip of blue tape. Name? Daniel Ruiz. He wrote it in neat block letters and placed it beside the cassette. Then he looked at me. Ready? I almost said yes automatically. The words stopped behind my teeth. My father's voice had been gone for 9 years. I remembered it in fragments, calling me in for dinner, arguing with a mechanic, singing badly while washing dishes. Memory had softened the edges. A recording would make him alive for however long the tape lasted, then take him away again. No, I said. Graham's hand moved away from the controls. He waited. I breathed once. Do it anyway. Static filled the office. Then my father laughed. Not a polite laugh. A full, surprised burst that made me grip the desk. Someone off microphone told him to start over. He said, "You're the one who coughed," and the other person denied it. I knew that rhythm. I knew the way he dragged out one word when he was teasing. I had forgotten it completely until that second. My father introduced the East Harbor Oral History Project and explained that he was interviewing people whose families had been displaced by redevelopment, rent increases, factory closures, or what he called the 1,000 quiet reasons a neighborhood loses the people who built it. I listened with my eyes closed. He sounded younger, more hopeful, and less tired than the man I remembered near the end of his life. He spoke about preserving ordinary voices before official records reduced them to numbers. I had built exhibits around exactly that kind of history, mounted photographs, fabricated listening stations, painted timelines on temporary walls. I had never known my father had once sat behind a recorder doing the same work. When the introduction ended, Graham stopped the tape before the next interview. He did not ask whether I was all right. He gave me silence wide enough to decide what I could bear. "I want a copy," I said eventually. We can make two. You said one tape. You said we'd try one. We tried it. He placed the cassette in a clean case. The recording is recoverable. The rest may not be in the same condition. I looked at the box. There were at least 30 tapes inside. How long? Several weeks, if we do it carefully. We? You decide what gets played. I handle the equipment. He hesitated. Or you take the box and hire an archive. I can give you names. There it was again. A way out, placed directly in front of me. I hated how much easier it made staying. I agreed to return 2 nights later. Before leaving, I loaded the first bins into my van. Graham remained near the workbench until I asked for help with the cabinet I had built in trade school. It was too wide to carry alone. He took the lower end. We turned sideways through the narrow aisle between 2 tables, moving in small steps. Left, he said behind me. I know. You're heading toward the drill press. I also know where the drill press is. Then this is a creative choice. I laughed despite myself, and the cabinet shifted. Graham's hand closed around the side before it could crush my fingers. Got it? He asked. His chest was close enough behind my shoulder that I felt his warmth through my shirt. He did not move until I said yes. The awareness was brief, inconvenient, and impossible to blame on gratitude. We carried the cabinet to the van and set it down. When I straightened, Graham was looking at a shallow cut across my thumb. You're bleeding. Occupational hazard. He reached toward a first aid box, then stopped. Do you want something for it? The question was precise. Not can I fix it. Not hold still. Just a choice. I have bandages in the van. He nodded and stepped back. 2 nights later, I returned with coffee for myself and nothing for him, because I had not asked what he drank. Graham had already set up the equipment. My father's chair stood near the wall, with one joint repaired, and the blue return label still hanging from it. You fixed that. It was getting worse every time someone moved it. I didn't ask you to. No. Are you charging me? No. I ran my fingers over the repaired rail. The wood had been cleaned, but not refinished. The scratches my father left were still there. Graham had repaired the weakness without erasing the history. I wanted to thank him and resented that the feeling arrived first. We selected the next cassette. The case was labeled M. Rourke, House/Leaving. Graham became very still. I asked whether he wanted another tape. No. He sat beside me rather than across the table. This time, I wrote the name on the blue strip while he prepared the cassette. Marianne Rourke. The letters looked too intimate in my handwriting. Graham placed the tape in the deck, but kept his hand above the button. Ready? I asked him. His eyes remained on the machine. No. Then, with a breath that sounded almost like anger, he pressed play. A woman's voice emerged beneath the static, younger than the woman in the photograph, and steadier than either of us expected. She gave her name, the year, and the address of the house where Graham had grown up. My father asked why she had agreed to be interviewed. There was a long pause. Then Marianne said, I left that house because staying had started to feel more dangerous than disappearing. Graham reached for the stop button. His fingers hovered over it, trembling once, but he could not press it. For the next 3 weeks, Tuesdays and Thursdays became fixed points in my schedule. I spent the day at a fabrication shop near Canton, building display walls for a maritime exhibit, then drove to Graham's workshop after closing. By the 4th session, I no longer waited for him to tell me where to put my coat. By the 6th, he had stopped setting out the folding chair because I always dragged over the same scarred stool. We followed the ritual. 1 tape, 1 name written on blue tape, 1 decision about whether the voice belonged with the archive, with a family, or only with the people in the room. At first, Graham asked, "Ready?" before every recording. Later, he only looked at me, and I nodded. The cassette rack beside his equipment leaned slightly to the right. I noticed it on the first night and tried to ignore it for 5 more. On the 7th session, it wobbled when Graham pulled out a cleaning cassette. I caught the top before 3 tapes slid onto the floor. This is terrible, I said. It has held for 8 years. So has a bad marriage. That doesn't make it structurally sound. He looked at the rack, then at me. You compare shelving to marriage often? Only when both are one bad decision from collapse. He handed me a screwdriver without being asked. I spent 40 minutes reinforcing the joints with scrap wood while he cleaned tape heads. When I finished, he tested the rack with both hands. You overbuilt it. That's what people say when something stops moving. He nodded toward my father's chair. Then you should approve of what I did. The chair waited near my usual stool, no longer clamped to the bench. Graham had repaired the loose joint, replaced a missing dowel, and cleaned years of gray dust from the seat. He had not sanded out the crescent mark where I dropped a hammer at 16. He had not touched the dark stain my father left after setting down a coffee mug without a coaster. The blue return label still hung beneath the seat. You could sell this, I said. Not legally. I mean if it were yours. It isn't. I turned the chair over, checking the joinery. His repair was almost invisible. You put hours into it. 2.5. You counted? I invoice by time. But you're not invoicing me. That doesn't make time stop existing. I looked at him. You always have an answer? Only when you ask the same question in different clothes. We argued about auctions while digitizing an interview with a retired machinist. I asked whether Graham ever considered that every profitable object had belonged to someone who might still want it. He said of course he considered it. Then how do you sell any of it? Because wanting something and maintaining legal ownership are not the same. Convenient. Not especially. He adjusted the playback speed by a fraction. I've bought units full of unopened store inventory, broken appliances, and furniture covered in mold. I've also found ashes in a cookie tin and a child's medical records inside a dresser. Those go back. And the rest becomes inventory. Some of it. You decide what matters. Graham finally looked at me. No, I decide what I can recognize as irreplaceable. I'm sure I get it wrong. The admission disarmed me more effectively than defensiveness. A week later, I watched him correct one of those mistakes. An auction lot from another facility arrived in the back of a delivery truck. Graham and I were lifting out a narrow bookcase when he found an envelope taped beneath a shelf. Inside were photographs of an elderly man in a hospital bed, surrounded by children and grandchildren. One picture had a funeral date written on the back. Graham stopped unloading. He searched the facility paperwork, called 2 numbers, and eventually reached the dead man's daughter. His voice changed when he spoke to her, softer, but not falsely warm. He did not tell her she was lucky he had found the photographs. He apologized that they had entered an auction at all. The next morning, he drove 40 minutes to return them. He never mentioned the cost of the bookcase or the lost work time. That night, I brought takeout from a Dominican place near my job site. I set one container beside Graham without asking what he wanted. You assumed, he said. You eat the same turkey sandwich every night. That doesn't mean I dislike it. It means no one who likes you has intervened. He opened the container and inspected the rice, chicken, and plantains. What if I hate plantains? Then I'll mark them discard. He gave me a flat look, but he ate every one. Afterward, he found a photograph from my storage unit, showing me at 22, wearing safety glasses and standing beside a badly painted theater set. He placed it under unknown. I changed the label to humiliating evidence. Graham crossed out my words and wrote, Mateo, first paid billed. How do you know that? You wrote it on the back. You remember everything you read? Only the things you keep pretending don't matter. The boxes I had taken home remained sealed in my apartment. Graham knew, because he asked for a specific interview notebook, and I admitted it was still packed with the rest. You've had the boxes for 2 weeks, he said. I've been working. Opening cardboard is not a renovation project. You have no idea how I organize. His gaze moved to the screwdriver I had left on his table 3 sessions earlier, and now used as if it belonged there. I have some idea. I told him unpacking was pointless, while my current lease had only 4 months left. He asked where I planned to go afterward. Wherever the work is. That wasn't an answer. It was the answer. Graham did not push. He only peeled an old unknown label from a tape and waited for me to supply the speaker's name. We identified 11 people over those weeks. Isaiah Cole, a retired librarian whose name appeared in my father's notes, helped us match voices to neighborhood records. He came to the workshop once, listened for 10 minutes, and cried without embarrassment when he recognized an old friend. After he left, Graham and I replaced 4 unknown labels with full names. The act should have felt administrative. It did not. Each name made the box less like abandoned property and more like a room filling with people. Graham's handwriting remained squared and careful. Mine slanted downward when I was tired. He began leaving the marker on my side of the table. I began arriving before he finished work, content to watch him fit broken pieces of walnut together until he was ready for the tapes. One Thursday, my phone lit up while Graham was cleaning a cassette shell. The email subject appeared across the screen before I turned it over. Portland Natural History, 6-month installation offer. The job paid more than anything local. It included housing and a completion bonus. 6 months in Oregon, beginning in 5 weeks. Graham's eyes flicked toward the screen, then back to the tape. Good offer? I haven't opened it. You should. That sounded almost like an order. It was practical advice. He became formal for the rest of the evening. He called me Mateo instead of Ruiz, which should have felt more personal, but somehow did not. He stopped teasing. When I reached for a tool, he moved it toward me before our hands could meet. At the end of the session, he handed me a box of carving tools from my unit. Found these behind a cabinet. You don't find things behind cabinets 3 weeks after cataloging them. Apparently I do. I studied him. Is this your way of making sure I come back? His expression barely changed, but he picked up the cleaning cloth and folded it twice. You already come back. For the tapes. Right. The word landed with too much weight. I wanted him to ask about Portland. I wanted to tell him I had spent years accepting jobs before anyone could notice I was leaving. Instead, I put the tools in my van and drove home with the offer still unopened. The next Tuesday, we played an interview my father had recorded with a woman whose building had been condemned after a developer bought the block. Daniel asked whether she regretted moving. She said regret had nothing to do with it. She had left because staying had become impossible. My father was quiet for several seconds. Then his voice came through the static, thoughtful and familiar. Leaving isn't proof that you stopped loving a place. Sometimes it means you no longer believe the place will keep you. I looked across the table at Graham. His hand rested beside the stop button, not touching it. He was watching me with the same guarded stillness he wore whenever he wanted to ask something and refused to give himself permission. Neither of us was thinking about the neighborhood. A week later, Graham let Marianne's full interview run. Her voice came through the speakers in uneven waves, sometimes clear, sometimes buried beneath a soft hiss. She told my father that leaving had not been one decision. It had been a series of smaller ones she kept postponing, until fear made the final choice for her. Graham's father controlled the money, the car, the telephone, and eventually the people she was allowed to see. She had planned to stay with her sister for 2 weeks while she found work. Graham was supposed to join her once she had a room and a paycheck. Then his father threatened court, shame, and every story a frightened woman already tells herself. Marianne admitted that temporary distance became silence because each month made returning harder. I told myself he was safer without the fight, she said. That was partly true and partly cowardice. Graham sat so still that the chair looked built around him. One hand closed over the work table while the other rested beside the cassette deck. When Marianne described seeing him once from across a school parking lot and leaving before he noticed her, his fingers tightened. My father asked why she had not gone to him. The tape hissed before she answered, because by then, I was afraid he would look at me and confirm what I already believed about myself. Graham stopped the recording. The click sounded too sharp in the office. He stared at the blue label bearing her name, then pressed one curling corner flat, as if that were the problem. She was there, he said. His voice sounded controlled, but the control had become visible effort. She was close enough to see me. I did not know which answer would hurt him less, so I said nothing. He stood and walked to the shelves, then back to the table. I spent 30 years thinking she left and never looked back. Now you know she looked back. He gave a short, humorless laugh. From a parking lot. I almost told him she had been afraid. Fear explained behavior. It did not restore birthdays, school plays, or the years a child waited for footsteps that never came. You don't have to make it better for me, he said. I wasn't going to. That surprised him enough to make him look at me. What were you going to say? That she had reasons, and that you still had to live with what those reasons cost. His eyes dropped. Most people pick one. One what? Either she was trapped, so I'm not allowed to be angry, or she left, so nothing else matters. I leaned against the desk. Both can be true. She could have been scared. You could have been a kid who thought he wasn't worth coming back for. His breath changed, and something in him stopped pretending the sentence had missed. That's what I thought, he said. Not just that she didn't want my father. That whatever came after him still didn't include me. He rubbed both hands over his face. I built an entire life around never making anyone regret keeping me. The confession was small enough that someone else might have overlooked it. I understood, because I had built my own life around leaving before anyone asked. Graham turned away, and I recognized the movement. It was the same one I made when embarrassment became too physical to hide. Do you want me to leave? He did not answer immediately. His shoulders rose once and lowered. Then he looked back at me. No, he said, I don't. It was the first time he had asked me to stay without giving me something to carry, repair, identify, or sign. We did not restart Marianne's interview that night. Instead, Graham opened a tape containing 2 retired dock workers arguing about whether a demolished tavern had served the best crab soup in East Baltimore. I laughed hard enough that Graham finally did too, although his eyes remained tired. We worked until almost midnight. At some point, he placed tea beside my hand. He had remembered I disliked his coffee and used the chipped green mug I always chose. We labeled the tape, saved the file, and sat in the quiet after it ended, without searching for an excuse to stand. After that night, the reasons Graham found for me to return became increasingly ridiculous. He discovered one glove from a pair I had already taken home. Then a brass drawer pull from a cabinet I no longer owned. Then a photograph of a dog neither of us recognized. He texted pictures with brief messages. Found another one. Might be yours. Need you to confirm. I returned every time, even when I knew the object was not mine. On the 3rd Thursday, he handed me a box containing 6 rusted screws and a wooden knob. This is insulting, I said. You build exhibits. Those could be specialized. They came from my junk drawer. Then you know what they are. Graham folded his arms. Do you want them or not? I want you to admit you cataloged my unit well enough that none of this was misplaced. His eyes shifted toward the digitization table. We still have tapes. That isn't what I asked. You ask questions as if you already know the answer. Usually because you've labeled the answer and put it on a shelf. His mouth twitched, then went still. I held up the wooden knob. Did you lose this? No. The glove? No. The dog? Another unit. Graham. He took the knob from my fingers and set it down. I ran out of legitimate reasons to call you about 3 weeks ago. The honesty landed with enough force that I forgot the response I had prepared. You can call me without a reason. He studied my face, as if the statement contained a condition he could not locate. People say that. I'm not people. You know what I mean. I know you think wanting someone near you needs to be disguised as a task. His gaze shifted to the workbench. Tasks are clear. So are phone calls. Not always. I moved close enough that the air between us felt deliberate. Then try one. Call and say, Mateo, I want to see you. The words made my pulse louder, but I did not step away. Graham's voice dropped. And if you don't, I'll tell you. And if you do, then I'll come. He lifted one hand, stopped before touching me, and asked, "Can I kiss you?" No excuse about dust on my face or needing to reach past me. Just the question. Yes. Graham's palm settled against my jaw with a care that made the contact feel more intimate than urgency would have. The kiss was brief at first, almost cautious. When I leaned closer, he kissed me again, slower and surer. He tasted faintly of tea. His thumb moved once along my cheek, and the quiet sound he made against my mouth stayed with me longer than the kiss itself. Nothing interrupted us. We stopped because we chose to, both breathing harder than the moment seemed to justify. Graham kept his hand near my face for another second, then let it fall. I watched him rebuild the walls behind his eyes. "This doesn't change who owns the tapes," he said. "I know. Or the rest of your property. I know. I don't want you thinking you owe me anything because I returned your belongings." Each sentence was careful, ethical, and somehow worse than regret. "Do you wish you hadn't kissed me?" "No." "Then stop talking like you need to file a report." His jaw tightened. "I'm trying to make sure the situation stays clear." "Clear for who?" He looked at the blue labels on the table. Marianne Rourke. Daniel Ruiz. Return. Complete. Hold. Every difficult thing in his life had a word attached to it. I picked up the wooden knob and placed it in his palm. "You don't have to decide what this is tonight, but you don't get to hide behind everything it isn't." For 1 second, I thought he might ask me to stay again. Instead, he looked toward the cassette deck. "The kiss changes nothing about the box." The distance in his voice returned so quickly it made the room feel colder. I stepped back. "That's the problem," I said. "You keep explaining what this isn't." He had labels for every object in the workshop. Standing between us, with my mouth still warm from his, was the first thing he could not name. For the next week, Graham treated the kiss like an incident that had been documented and closed. He was not cruel. Cruelty would have been easier. He answered my messages, kept the Tuesday and Thursday sessions, set out the green mug, and asked before playing every tape. But the careless details vanished. He no longer leaned against my workbench while I fixed something. He stopped sending photographs of objects that did not belong to me. Every conversation had a purpose and a natural place to end. On Tuesday, he returned my father's chair. It sat beside the rolling door, wrapped in moving blankets, the blue return label tied to one repaired rail. Graham had replaced nothing that could be saved. The seat still held its old dents. He had polished the wood only enough to reveal the grain. It looked stronger and more familiar, which made me angry, for reasons I could not explain without sounding ungrateful. "You finished it." "Yes." "When?" "Sunday." I looked toward the digitization table. My name had disappeared from the whiteboard where Graham listed current projects. Daniel Ruiz oral history remained, with final transfer, Thursday written beside it. "You're finishing everything." That was the goal. No, preserving the tapes was the goal. The tapes are preserved. The words carried the finality of a receipt. That evening, we processed 4 cassettes instead of 2. Graham had already cleaned the shells and prepared replacement cases. He moved efficiently, almost aggressively, though his hands stayed careful. We labeled the files, saved backup copies, and transferred ownership notes to Isaiah's archive form. At 10:30, Graham placed the final cassette in the gray box. "That's it?" 28 transferred, 2 were blank. 1 was too damaged to save. He slid the box toward me. "Hold." Ask First had been peeled from the lid. In its place was a clean strip marked complete. I stared at the word. "You labeled it." "It's done." Apparently. He reached for the archive paperwork. "Isaiah can accept the community copies Monday. Your father's originals remain yours. And your mother's?" "I made 1 copy." "Have you listened to the rest?" "No." I waited for him to say when he would. He only clipped the paperwork together. On Thursday, he returned the final boxes from the workshop. My hand tools. The foreign coins, 3 notebooks. He even brought the rusted screws and wooden knob he had once used as excuses to call me. You can throw those away. They're yours. They're trash. That's your decision. The shape of the words was familiar. Your choice. Your property. Your exit. Graham had become so careful not to hold anything of mine that he was pushing every last piece toward the door. I set the screws on the table. Did I do something? No. That answer is getting old. I'm trying to make this uncomplicated. It wasn't complicated when you kissed me. His eyes lifted, then moved away. That was before I thought through the situation. What situation? You lost most of what you owned. I had control of it. You were here because I had your property and the equipment to preserve the tapes. You asked permission. That doesn't erase the imbalance. No, but apparently it erases the kiss. I didn't say that. You keep not saying anything. Graham's jaw tightened. You have a life outside this workshop. You have no idea what that life looks like. I know you have an offer in Portland. The fact that he remembered the city hurt more than if he had forgotten. I haven't accepted it. You should, if it's good work. Do you want me to? What I want should not decide where you live. That isn't what I asked. He turned toward the shelves. The installation starts in 5 weeks. You'll need time to pack your tools. I can crate the fragile equipment and arrange shipping. For a moment, I could only look at his back. You'll pack me. I'll pack the tools. Of course, because tools are clear. He stopped moving. I walked closer. You know how to return photographs to families. You know how to repair chairs without erasing the marks. You know how to ask before touching a cassette. But you don't know how to ask a person to stay. That would be asking you to give something up for me. It would be asking a question. And if you said yes because you felt grateful, I'm not grateful right now. His shoulders tightened. You keep acting like your only choices are using me or letting me go, I said. There's an entire human conversation between those things. Graham turned. Anger had entered the control in his face. You want a human conversation? Fine. You only stay where something is unfinished. The sentence found its target immediately. A tape needs cleaning. You come back. A chair needs moving. You come back. But the moment a job is complete, you're already looking for the next city. You don't know why I take those jobs. I know you haven't unpacked the boxes you fought to get back. That has nothing to do with you. I know. The quiet way he said it made the words worse. So that's your solution? I asked. Finish everything before I can leave first? His face changed. Barely, but enough. That isn't what I'm doing. It is exactly what you're doing. You're turning me back into an empty workshop and calling it respect. I'm removing the reason you had to be here. And you think that's kindness? I think it gives you a real choice. No, it gives you protection. From what? From finding out whether I would stay when there was nothing left to fix. The room went silent. I wanted him to deny it. Instead, he picked up the gray box and held it out. All the originals are inside. I took it. The cardboard felt heavier than 31 cassettes should have. I carried it to my van without asking for help. Graham did not follow. When I drove away, the rolling door remained open behind me, spilling workshop light across the pavement. I told myself not to look in the mirror. At home, the returned boxes formed a wall along my living room. I opened the Portland offer. Good pay. Furnished apartment. 6 months guaranteed. The kind of job I usually accepted before finishing the email. I typed a response agreeing to the terms, then stopped before sending it. The archival box sat on my kitchen table. Complete faced me from the lid. Inside, beneath the inventory sheet, was an envelope marked Unlisted Outtake. It held a digital drive and a note in Graham's handwriting. Found after the last transfer. Your father speaking off record. I made a copy in case you want it. I connected the drive. My father's voice emerged through low room noise. Mateo packed his toys again, he said. Someone asked whether we were moving. No, that's the problem. No one said anything about moving. My body went still. My father sighed. He keeps a box ready. Every place we live, he waits for us to lose it. I think he believes if he packs first, it won't hurt as much. Or maybe he thinks the leaving is his fault somehow. The other voice became too faint to understand. My father answered, I keep telling him we're staying. I don't think he believes adults when they say that anymore. The recording ended. For years, I had remembered my father as a man who never noticed. I had mistaken his inability to solve the problem for blindness. He had seen me. The fear had not been invisible, and it had never been proof that I was difficult to keep. When I returned the drive to the box, I found an old strip of blue tape beneath the inventory sheet. Hold, ask first. Graham had never kept the box from me. He had asked, before playing the tapes, before touching my face, before every step that mattered. And when he became afraid, he had done what I did. He packed the feeling away before anyone could choose what happened to it. I reopened the Portland email and declined. Not because Graham needed me. Not because Baltimore had become permanent. I declined because I was tired of treating movement as the only evidence that I still had control. The next morning, I accepted a local museum fabrication contract I had previously dismissed as too small. By afternoon, I signed a lease on an apartment with enough light for a drafting table. Choices made before I spoke to Graham. A life that did not depend on whether he wanted me in his. Before sunrise the following day, I stood outside Rourke Restoration, carrying one empty cardboard box. The workshop was dark. Graham's truck was parked beside the loading dock, which meant he was already inside. For the first time, I had not come to retrieve anything, repair anything, or finish a job. I raised my hand and knocked before I could talk myself out of it. Metal scraped inside the workshop. A light came on behind the office window, then another above the main floor. Graham opened the side door wearing a charcoal sweater with the sleeves pushed to his elbows. He looked as if he had slept badly and come to work early to avoid admitting it. His eyes dropped to the empty box in my hands. What did I miss? Not good morning. Not why are you here? What did I miss? I stepped inside. The workshop smelled like sawdust, old coffee, and the cold air that had followed me through the door. Nothing, I said. You returned everything. Graham closed the door but did not move closer. Then what's the box for? I set it on the steel table between us. There was no blue tape on it, no marker. No category waiting to decide what happened next. I declined Portland. His face changed before he controlled it. You didn't have to do that. I know. Mateo, if this is because of what I said, it isn't. I told him about the local museum contract and the apartment I had leased the day before. I told him the decisions had been made before I came to the workshop because I needed to know I was choosing a life, not clinging to the first person who had treated my belongings carefully. Graham listened without interrupting. When I finished, he looked toward the empty box again. So you're staying in Baltimore. For now. His expression closed slightly. For now is honest. It's also not the whole answer. I moved around the table. You don't have to find another reason to call me. You can just say you want me here. Graham's breath caught so quietly I might have missed it if the room had not been still. He placed both hands on the edge of the workbench, the same way he had when he first showed me the photograph. Wanting you here isn't the difficult part, he said. Saying it without attaching a job to it is. Then don't attach one. You make that sound simple. It is simple. It just isn't safe. His eyes lifted to mine. I understood the fear there, because it looked like my own, only translated into a different language. Graham rubbed his thumb over the pale scar on his knuckle. I know how to be useful, he said. I know how to repair something, deliver it, make a list, finish what I promised. When the work is done, I know what I'm worth. He swallowed. I don't know how to stand in front of someone with nothing to offer, except that I want them. Then stand there. He gave a short, unsteady laugh. That's your advice. It's more than you gave me. The laugh faded, but some of the tension left his face. I wanted you here after the first week, he said. Before the tapes made sense, before the chair was finished, I kept finding things, because every time I imagined calling without a reason, I heard how easily you could say no. You were allowed to hear no. I know. You were also allowed to hear yes. His gaze moved over my face, as if he were still looking for a task hidden in the answer. I touched the edge of the empty box. I don't want another thing from you. I want the part where you stay, after there's nothing left to fix. Graham looked at me for a long time. Then he stepped away from the workbench. I'm not asking you to leave your life in my workshop, he said. I'm asking if I can be part of the life you finally unpack. The words struck the place in me that had spent years waiting for departure. Not a promise that nothing would change, not a claim that he could make permanence safe, just a request to be included. Yes. My voice failed on the first attempt, so I said it again. Yes. Graham reached for me, then paused with his hand beside my face. Even now, even after everything, he waited. I leaned into his palm. You can kiss me. This kiss held none of the caution of the first one. He pulled me close, one hand at my jaw, the other settling at my waist. I gripped the front of his sweater and kissed him until the weeks of almost questions, careful distances, and returned objects stopped standing between us. When we finally separated, his face remained close to mine. I want you here, he said. No task, no object, no reason attached. Good, I answered, because the box is empty, and I'm not carrying it home alone. We did not solve everything that morning. Graham still flinched when I mentioned future contracts outside Baltimore. I still caught myself planning exits before plans had fully formed. But we agreed on what we were doing. Dating. Choosing. Asking instead of assuming. I kept my new apartment. Graham did not offer me a key before I was ready, and I did not leave a toothbrush at his place as a test. We had dinner that night at the work table, surrounded by furniture that belonged to other people, and one empty box that belonged to no emergency at all. At one point, Graham called my name just to ask whether I wanted more rice. The question made me smile so obviously that he accused me of being dramatic. A week later, we delivered the digitized oral histories to Isaiah. He had arranged archival storage and contact forms for the families we had identified. Some recordings remained restricted because the speakers had discussed private violence, immigration status, or medical histories. Others became part of a neighborhood collection available to researchers and relatives. My father's introduction was included with my permission. Hearing his voice in the archive room hurt, but it was a clean hurt, not the panic of something slipping away. His work no longer existed only inside a damp box. It had a place, a catalog number, and people responsible for keeping it. Graham listened to the rest of Marianne's interview alone first, then asked me to sit with him while he played it again. She did not ask for forgiveness on the tape. She admitted that shame had become an excuse for continued absence, and that Graham had paid for choices he never made. He cried once, silently, and did not apologize for it. He chose not to contact her immediately, though Isaiah found an address that might have been current. Knowing why isn't the same as knowing what I want next, he said. I told him he was allowed to take time. The recordings gave him context, not an obligation to reconcile. By spring, I had a permanent workbench along the west wall of Graham's shop. Permanent meant my name was painted on the drawer instead of written on tape. I built museum cases there and helped him fabricate missing pieces for furniture restorations. We also started a small volunteer project with 2 local storage facilities. When buyers found photographs, documents, ashes, or handmade objects they did not want to sell, Graham and I helped locate the former owners. We returned wedding albums, military letters, a child's violin, and 1 box of recipe cards that 3 sisters thought had disappeared after their mother died. We did not save everything. We did not find everyone, but fewer lives were reduced to anonymous inventory. Graham stopped inventing objects to make me visit. Sometimes he called and said, "I want to see you," with the solemnity of a man reading a legal statement. I always made him say it again. I unpacked my apartment slowly. My mother's purple blanket went over the couch. The foreign coins sat in a glass jar on my desk. My father's restored chair stood beside my drafting table, still carrying the coffee stain and the hammer mark. Not every box was opened at once. Graham never treated that as failure. One evening, months after the auction, He helped me hang the last framed photograph in my hallway. It was the picture of our parents beside the cassette recorder, preserved behind museum glass. When we finished, I noticed an empty cardboard box near the front door. For years, a box by the door had meant preparation. It meant keep only what mattered. It meant do not get comfortable. I looked through the apartment at the chair, the blanket, the photographs, and Graham, standing beneath the hallway light, with a level still in his hand. For the first time in my life, the box by the door wasn't waiting for me to leave. It was empty, because I had finally unpacked,